So mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, as Tim just told us, educated us, right? So every cell has hundreds of mitochondria. And mitochondria are what are called organelles. They have their own DNA. In fact, evolutionarily, mitochondria were bacteria that basically ended up in the symbiotic relationship with what became our cells. So we each have mitochondria, hundreds of them in each one of our cells. Each mitochondria has its own nucleus and has its own DNA. And the mitochondria make the energy that the rest of the cell uses. That energy is called ATP, and it eats up glucose or it eats up ketones if you're in ketosis, and it uses that to make the ATP. So every cell in our body gets its energy, which is what it uses to function, from the mitochondria. And so there's been a lot of research into the relationship between mitochondria and aging, and that dysfunctional mitochondria, as they start to break down and stop working and have damage, may actually be a key driver for many diseases that we experience as humans, including many cancers, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, features of autism, muscle tissues being weak, etc. So as the cells get older and the mitochondria stop working, we make new mitochondria, but over time, the DNA degrades and the mitochondria become less effective, and there are fewer functional mitochondria per cell. The cell stops working right,
can I ask you a
and
question?
Eventually the organism stops working right.
Have you learned anything about the connection of creatine to mitochondrial health?
It's part of some of the processes, but there's some separate research on this, but it's definitely worth spending time on.
People are crazy about hitting 5 grams or 10 grams of creatine. It's becoming like a trend.
Yeah, I think it's 5 grams. Yeah, something like that.
It's trending on Twitter. I think it's kind of like a meme or a joke in addition to being serious.
I don't think it's a joke. Is there any science that backs that up or not really for mitochondria?
There are questions on this, like, do you want to focus on things that are increasing biogenesis, which is creation of new mitochondria? Does that create a better benefit? On the creatine work, I've read some of these papers. I actually tried it for a while. I personally had a allergy to it, which is kind of rare, but happens. But anyway, we can talk about it further. So one of the key things was there are 3 papers that I wanted to just highlight that kind of follow an interesting theme. The first one was from 2023 from Wash U in St. Louis. And this paper, Nick, if you could just pull up that image of mitochondria being transferred, these folks identified and demonstrated that mitochondria can actually transfer from one cell to another. So if you've got a cell that's got damaged or dysfunctional mitochondria, they've identified 3 mechanisms by which mitochondria can move into a cell that needs more mitochondria that are working and are more functional. That's something that's been theorized for a long time. People have said, oh, well, we think mitochondria transfer, but there wasn't really evidence of this. So as of 2 years ago, these guys provided very good evidence of mitochondria that we can now put into cells. If it's floating around, it can make its way into another cell. And as a result, it can rejuvenate or provide energy to a dysfunctional cell, which might improve dysfunctional tissue or improve disease. The second paper was done last month out of Columbia University, and this was the first mapping of the mitochondria in the human brain. And so these folks created 703 tiny cubes of brain from a person that passed away, a 54-year-old donor. And then they analyzed the mitochondria in each of those cubes, and they used that to make a map of mitochondria in the brain. And what it showed was that different parts of the brain, different cells had different amounts of mitochondria and different mitochondrial function, which actually starts to highlight how that difference in energy production in different cells in different parts of the brain may actually cause some of the things like memory loss or speech impairment, or as we age, the fact that we end up being, kind of forgetful or start to lose some of our capacity, that the mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain might actually be the key driver of that aging symptomology. The third paper, which just came out of a team at Zhejiang University in China. So what these guys did, which was really incredible, is they took stem cells, so stem cells that they got out of human blood, and they took those stem cells and they figured out a way to treat the stem cells so that those stem cells would start to make an excess amount of mitochondria than they normally would make. In fact, they were able to get those stem cells to make 854 times the number of mitochondria that those cells would normally make. And those mitochondria were on average 5.7 times more efficient at making energy, ATP. So they created highly energetic mitochondria and they made a lot of them. And the idea that we can put mitochondria into our body or into tissue in our body to heal it or repair it has been something that folks have been trying to do research around for a long time. But the limiting factor is access to enough mitochondria. So this mechanism that they developed where they could take stem cells, make copies of the stem cells, make lots of mitochondria, and then they isolate that mitochondria and use it as a therapeutic tool. And they did it in cartilage that was damaged, and they were able to heal that cartilage. So this is a group that does bone and tissue repair studies, but they applied the mitochondria directly into the area where there was damage to the bone, and the bone grew back, and it actually improved the healing in an incredible way. So this opens up the door to this whole new therapeutic modality, a new type of therapy called mitotherapy or mitochondrial therapy that, based on the series of papers that we're seeing coming out recently, I believe could end up becoming a really incredible new therapy that may ultimately lead to the treatment for many diseases that we're kind of dealing with right now. So I just wanted to kind of link those out.
Would this be immediately applicable to, say, people with sports injuries, meniscus, knees, ankles? You start to think about those bone spurs, chips that basketball players, football players go through. Would this be like the low-hanging fruit for this technology?
Yeah, I mean, what they did this in, and I think this was published in a research magazine called Bone or something, Bone and Tissue or something.
Yeah.
But they did it in
let my subscription lapse. Thanks for reminding me.
They did it in a mouse model of osteoarthritis, and it repaired this osteoarthritis. But that's exactly right. And so that's tissue where you can, using a microscope, you can actually see the healing happening. Wow. But you could see this being applied, for example, to cerebrospinal fluid, where you can basically increase the energetic mitochondrial production that finds its way into maybe neuronal cells, into neurons in your brain, and improves your brain function. Or you could put it into damaged hearts after heart attacks and improve heart function. So there's all these theories about how you could use mitotherapy as this becomes possible to now produce lots of mitochondria and use it as a therapy that can then be applied to lots of disease states. So I think there's going to be a bit of a blossoming of research in this area of mitotherapy.